Here's to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Colors and paisleys, as well as the rest of us. Thank you all for joining us today at David Abel's Davos of the West. I got it in. I wasn't able to be there on Sunday night, but I can't resist calling this what it is, bringing together the best minds and the best people to talk about the toughest problems and solutions to those problems. So I'm Kathleen Brown. I'm a partner at Manatt, Phelps, and Phillips, and I am pleased to welcome today's panel on investing in clean energy and climate solutions, our challenges and opportunities. And we are here to say there are still opportunities, even though if you read the papers every day, we know that there's no shortages of challenges. So as the global energy landscape shifts and the urgency to transition to sustainable solutions has never been greater, clean energy investments are still at an all-time high, driven by innovation, policy shifts, and growing demand for climate-conscious solutions. Yet, alongside these opportunities, investors, businesses, and policymakers face significant challenges ranging from regulatory, political uncertainties, as well as infrastructure constraints, as well as financing gaps and our crazy market volatility. It's still volatile. So today our distinguished panel is going to explore critical questions at the heart of this transition, such as what are the most promising investment opportunities in clean energy and climate tech, and are they still there? What barriers still hinder large-scale adoption and financing? And how can investors, governments, and industries collaborate to accelerate this shift toward a low-carbon future? And what are the impacts of today's geopolitical and domestic market turmoil? We're fortunate to have a terrific group of experts with us who are going to bring deep expertise from across the energy, finance, and policy sectors, and they will share their insights with us today. So let me run through quickly and introduce our panel, and then we'll let them go at it. To my left is Lauren Faber O'Connor, partner, Lowercarbon Capital. More important to me is niece of Cheryl. That's right. Cheryl Alper of 14 Carats. If you want to get jewelry for your, give Cheryl a little plug here. But Lauren is really a leading lifelong environmentalist, and she currently leads strategic partnerships at Lowercarbon Capital, one of the largest early stage climate tech investment funds in the world. And I hope you'll tell us a little about them in your comments today. Prior to Lowercarbon, Lauren, as many of you know, was the Chief Sustainability Officer for the City of Los Angeles. While there, she developed and oversaw the green energy transition of over 24 public agencies, including some of the largest in the world: Los Angeles World Airports, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, and the Los Angeles Port Authority. And over that time, LA took the #1 spot in solar capacity, water and building efficiency, EV charging availability, and public transportation infrastructure projects. And she oversaw the national network of mayors, which Mayor Garcia started. Eric started, that were committed to climate leadership, known as Climate Mayors, and LA's 2-year chairmanship of the International Mayoral Climate Action Organization, C40. She has a lot to talk about. Danny Jaffe, to my left. Again, this is all family here because my son used to be at Angeleno Group.
He birthed Angeleno Group as one of the co-founders.
I was indeed co-founder of Angeleno Group. And Danny is a partner there and helps to lead the firm's investment activities in renewable power, critical infrastructure, sustainable inputs, digital manufacturing, and smart cities. Mr. Jaffe has more than 20 years of investment experience in private and public companies. Prior to joining Angeleno Group in 2007, he was an analyst at Verdexchange Partners, a value-oriented long-short investment fund, and previously he was an analyst at Bay City Capital, a leading $1.3 billion life sciences-focused venture capital firm. Next, we have Diego Soto Garcia, Senior Project Consultant and ESG Advisory Services for Stantec. And as I asked him before we started, Have you dropped the ESG? Okay, but you still are calling it sustainability. So Senior Project Consultant Sustainability Services at Stantec. Diego Soto is a senior, well, I just said that, and lead, sustainable finance lead in Stantec's Sustainability Advisory Services Group. With extensive experience in environmental, social, and governance matters, he advises multilateral development banks and project sponsors and private equity funds and financial institutions on integrating sustainability into their operational processes, businesses, and projects. And we're going to hear how that is still relevant even though they've changed the name. Next is Julia Pyper, who is Vice President of Public Affairs at GoodLeap, which is a leading financial technology company focused on accelerating the deployment of sustainable home solutions, where she oversees governmental relations, policy-related communications. She also supports GoodLeap's nonprofit partner, GivePower, which develops clean water and clean energy systems for communities in need around the world. And she started her career as a journalist, reporting on much of these areas. And our cleanup batter is the famous Tom Soto, founder of Latimer Partners, but more important to me, part of a great California Latino civil rights family. Knew his mom and his dad, who were great leaders of our state and really first movers in so many areas, as has Tom been. He has owned 4 private equity funds and now manages his family office, Latimer Partners, and he stood at the intersection of energy, tech, cloud-based and IoT platforms, renewable energy, and over many fourth industrial revolution-driven platforms where technology contributes to improving the human condition using AI, fintech, and blockchain, all the while challenging LPs, limited partners, and tech platforms to embrace diversity, equity, and inclusion. And he still is doing it. God bless him. So with that very illustrious panel, I'm going to shut up and ask Lauren to kick us off. Tell us about what you're doing now and where the opportunities are and the challenges are from the financial markets perspective.
Thank you, and I think we all need to recognize what an incredible civic leader we have here in Kathleen Brown herself, and how much she has stood for doing right by the state of California for so long, and so it's an honor to be here with you. I'm afraid some of you have just heard from me. I
haven't. So in politics, they always tell you just keep saying it over and over again. It takes
exactly.
10,
until it sticks.
10 hits for them.
Exactly. So we'll
get it.
We'll do it again. Yeah. No. We won't do the exact same thing. But to reiterate quickly on who Lowercarbon is, and then I do want to maybe delve a little bit deeper than I was able to before about kind of the state of play today. But as I mentioned, Lowercarbon Capital is a $2+ billion fund in investing in early stage climate tech companies across the pillars I mentioned, which is defossilizing the economy, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, and buying time for people and places that are getting hurt first by climate change. And the interesting thing about Lowercarbon that I find compared to some peer VCs is that we're heavily invested in capital-intensive, hard tech solutions. And that I think is pretty unique when it comes to early stage venture investors. And what I love about that is that and not to say that we are not invested in software solutions, a lot of solutions that are a little bit of both put together, but we are absolutely not going to save climate change with an app. We absolutely need to replace our infrastructure, build infrastructure that has no embodied carbon, and that we need to support grids, fleets, freight, buildings across the world, whether it's in more developed parts of the world with extraordinarily troubled aging infrastructure to folks that are putting things in the ground for the first time. it is a massive opportunity. And coming from Los Angeles, first of all, born and raised in Los Angeles, but coming from a role managing so much of that infrastructure, as Kathleen laid out, to me, I knew I had to stay in that space to be meaningful on climate, to feel like I was having a meaningful impact on where true emissions lie. And now, today, I think that that thesis and that approach by Lowercarbon is a key reason why we remain as bullish and strong and excited about the future, despite a macro environment that is really troublesome. I mean, let's be honest, it is chaos, and it's completely an anathema to growth and to improving people's lives, what we're experiencing right now. It is chaos. But through the chaos, we are holding steady and deploying capital in areas that, regardless of what the end game is going on around us, we share a common value and desire to grow, to be secure in our in that growth, to have investments that are going to last out decades and not be sort of a fad of the time or responsive to chaos, that we are steady through it. And that means all the same things that we're investing in today, because that is climate. Climate is a little bit of everything. And so when we invest in things that are securing and onshoring our supply chain in in nitrogen fertilizer, in cement, and in chemicals, where right now they come from very fossil intensive, very insecure places that don't have our best interest at heart. We are doing so many things at once and creating so much value by those investments. And I think that's where Lowercarbon really stands apart, and it's something that I'm so excited to be a part of, and I think makes us a really resilient investor in a time like this.
Great, thanks so much, Lauren. Danny, you're next. Tell us, what's Angeleno Group up to, and what are you seeing as the opportunities?
Sure.
And challenges.
I'd like to echo Lauren's statements. We appreciate Kathleen for everything you've done and moderating the panel and all the other panelists, and especially for having a son who created a firm and gave me a job.
That's important.
So that was good.
Now that's good investment.
So that's good. So Angeleno Group is a private equity firm focused on growth investments in clean energy and climate solutions. We're a little different than Lowercarbon in that we focus more on late stage venture all the way through to profitable companies. We take a global approach in what we do. Many of the companies are based in North America, but we've had 2 successful exits in Australia and 1 recent deal there that we invested into, 2 investments in Israel. And many of our companies have a global manufacturing footprint and sell internationally as well. We're deploying between 10 and 30 million of equity per company. It can be over multiple rounds of investment, and the ability to upsize with co-invest from some of our LPs. In all cases, we try and hold a board seat just so we can be in a position to add value and help the companies grow and flourish. So in terms of the opportunities, I mean, our whole firm was based on all of the tailwinds in clean energy and climate that have existed, currently exist, and will continue to exist. And if you look at the promise of clean energy, we've essentially achieved it. Wind and solar have gone down 70-80% in terms of their cost over the last decade. They're cheaper than fossil fuels in pretty much every geography now. If you look at the amount of capital that's now flowing into this sector globally, we're around 1.8 trillion. That's double what is in fossil fuels. And then if you look at both from a government perspective, things have changed temporarily, but as of the end of last year, more than 150 countries had signed up to net zero policies, and that represents around 93% of GDP. That's obviously changed a little recently, but that's probably, the long term is that it'll rebound, in our view. And then if you look at from a corporate perspective, nearly 100 and more than 70% of the Fortune 500 companies have signed up for climate initiatives, and that's up from 10% just in 2013. So the momentum is there. It has and will continue to be there. We're excited to be investors in this space, and we see a lot of opportunity.
Great. Diego Soto,
Yes, thank you.
your view and take on opportunities and challenges.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. So at Stantec, it's very different. We're not investors. We actually, in my role within the sustainability advisory team, I work with the investors, the lenders, and sometimes even the multilateral development banks who are interested in going into clean technologies and exploring different sectors and regions and how to find climate solutions. So from my perspective, one of the biggest opportunities comes in the intersection of these decarbonization goals with understanding how to make them resilient and connecting that with financial innovation. So that means that looking at the different mechanisms that either the individual investors or the lenders are considering in terms of how to make these projects possible. So as investors increasingly demand, these important decarbonization goals and net zero goals, and also understanding the risks of going into these new climate techs. They also want to understand how they can collect more of that information to be able to understand the risks. And this is where transparency and sustainability within that role is a huge catalyst for financial innovation. So in terms of opportunity, I see in my role, I've seen two main, I would say, rising momentums. One is on transition financing. So that is a lot of lenders and investors are helping industries or project developers in high emitting sectors to transition into not only decarbonization pathways, but also credible decarbonization pathways. What that means is that they're linking those goals either through financial metrics, but also using international standards or other frameworks, especially risk frameworks, that allow them to measure in a credible way how each one of those decarbonization goals are being, what their performance is on an annual basis and sometimes even on a quarter basis, depending on how sophisticated they are. On the second one is integrating sustainability, or ESG, integrated into financial products. So most of you probably have heard like green bonds or sustainability-linked bonds, or even sustainability-linked loans. So all of that is connecting financial accessibility and availability with metrics that allow the lenders to understand what are you doing to be able to not only invest or use those proceeds to improve the climate goals that the bank or the investor has, but also the individual companies have. And at the same time, understand what is the impact of every single action that they make in terms of the environment and the communities that they operate. Because that's the other aspect of climate. We tend to think about it only on the E side, right, the environmental side. But there is a social component of climate risk. And that's where the climate solutions, in terms of how do we integrate these financial products, is where they also link them to stakeholder engagement, for example, or understanding the human rights risks of their products, And so all of this comes obviously as an opportunity to transition a lot of these sectors that are hard to be able to do it by themselves. Now, the challenges of that is that I would say mainly twofold. One of them is greenwashing, right? There is a lot of, I would say, lack of credibility in terms of sustainability claims. And the second one is policy vacuums. So a lot of lenders and investors, when they look at compliance in terms of the different sectors and regions that they operate, they want to understand, first of all, what is it that they have to do to be able to be in compliance to operate in those sectors and regions. When there's a policy vacuum, it is very hard for them to operate in those sectors and regions, which makes financing either very expensive or inaccessible. So for them to be able to have those policy vacuums is a risk. Now, when it comes to greenwashing, one of the main aspects of it is the lack of clarity when it comes to those sustainability claims, when it comes to those metrics, because some of those metrics and goals are not linked to, for example, science-based targets, or those climate goals are also not realistic in the sense of they haven't been verified, or there's no third party or second opinion, for example, just to make sure that they are linked in any way. So those two challenges, as you can see there, they can be very much, I would say, detrimental in a way. But what I have seen from my perspective is that the lenders, investors, multilaterals, they see them as a way to actually, what can we do to operate within this environment and actually bring capital to the communities, to the environment, to the sectors and the regions that need it to actually implement these climate solutions.
Great, thank you. Julia.
All right, thank you. Well, I not only wore a little bit different outfit, but I also play a little bit different role in the investment area. So GoodLeap itself is not an investor. We have been invested in by a lot of investors. This includes MSD, BDT, Westcap, Brookfield, NEA. You may know some of these VC firms out there because we deploy sustainable solutions in the home. So we have over 1.1 million customers who we've helped purchase some kind of sustainable home upgrade, from solar and storage to heat pumps to drought-resistant landscaping to geothermal to insulation and spray foam in hurricane-prone places that also keeps your roof on. You imagine it. We try to make your building more efficient. We work with a network of 5,000 plus contractors to do that work and then keep the relationship with the customer. And we do have an app. We're not going to solve all climate change, but it plays a role because we play at the end point, right? Getting users to do what they can with their dollars and their decisions to tackle the 43% of emissions that come from decisions made in the home. So that is what we do day to day. We also do have a nonprofit Give Power that was mentioned. So we use financing and investment in a different context there to deploy clean energy projects and solar powered desalination systems around the world. GoodLeap actually funds all the overhead for Give Power with every transaction on our platform. Then we actually have an asset management sister company called GoodFinch that invests in clean energy projects, but also companies. We invest in a company called Ojo that does robotics to put piles in the ground for large-scale solar projects. So we do have a relationship there. What I'm seeing in my role is it's in the policy landscape, and I love and appreciate the momentum discussions that are, points that have been made that these are, the trend is there. People are moving and adopting these technologies because they're better. I'll do a little bit twist that I feel like we've always said that in the clean energy sector, and we assumed everyone got the message, and so we don't need to invest in policy or politics or any of that, and we are kind of paying a little bit of a price for it because we need to build our allies across the political spectrum. We're doing that now, but we're doing it under the gun. And I walk into so many offices in DC, and they're not even aware of the investments in their own districts. And we're doing it now that we have this threat to the Inflation Reduction Act and aspects of the infrastructure bill. But it's never great to do it under a deadline, right? And so it is opening a door, but I would encourage everyone in the investment community, including everyone we work with, is to start telling those stories and don't make the conclusion or the assumption that your constituents know the work you're doing. These are big projects, a lot of people do know, but also a lot of constituents don't. And when they learn about the abundance, the energy dominance in America that comes from these clean energy projects, they view it in a different lens that transcends the politics of the day. But I just add that I'm not sure that's totally appreciated. The tariffs, for instance, are going to be a hit to the sector, and I think we have to be real about, we'll see how much of this is sustained, but that will drive up in our sector the cost of heat pumps, the cost of inverters, the cost of batteries, the cost of roofing, literally everything, along with everything else. And so how do we adapt to that? How do the companies that everyone's invested in adapt to that? We're gonna have to make sure our balance sheets are really strong and have some hard discussions about how we, along with every other sector, weather through volatility. That word volatility often comes up from the investor folks I talk to. No one really likes volatility, so we're gonna have to figure out how we weather through this to prove that the sustainability ecosystem is indeed resilient and can be around. We have a lot of companies still going through valleys of death. We have contractors we work with who've been around a long time but still have very thin margins. They're on the forefront of deploying these solutions, and we have to figure out how to get through some of this volatility and support them together. And that includes consumers who also have real pressures on their pocketbook right now. We still hear words like the green premium being thrown around in our sector. So yes, foregone conclusion, these are better solutions. I think we still have a lot of work to do. And now we've got some new policy headwinds kind of coming our way. But that's not to say, this can't be done. We financed over $63 billion of sustainable solutions at GoodLeap so far. So we can do things at scale. We can get through volatility, but I do think everyone should be engaged in new and different ways to get that done.
Great. Tom.
Right on. Well, first of all, I have to thanks Kathleen for those kind words of introduction. And of course, Kathleen is not without her, heritage and legacy, and a lot of the reason
And infamy.
I mean, listen, a lot of the reason why we could be here and have sensibly planned policy and infrastructure is because of the leadership of her father. And when he was governor, Silicon Valley is not an accident, right? And the seed capital to that was in response to an international crisis called World War II and the Manhattan Project. And it took not a lot for Franklin Roosevelt to, read a letter from Albert Einstein in August of 1938 and write in the margins, see if this is really true, and put $6 million to the Corps of Engineers, send it to Manhattan Corps. And that's when the Manhattan Project was born. And Oppenheimer was, of course, here in Northern California, and he became their guy. And that was the beginning of a new chapter of scientific America. But it was also a new chapter in California because it gave to us the ability to invest into technology that was originally DoD based. It also created Los Alamos, which is owned by the Department of Energy and the University of California. And as a result, you went through a huge generation of capital-intensive technology development in Silicon Valley that gave to us the counterculture, quite frankly, moved in. And an interesting factoid is that the opening band for Hewlett-Packard's headquarters was the Warlocks, right? It was a Grateful Dead. And that was the beginning of the counterculture takeover of Silicon Valley. That ultimately brought us Apple and so forth and where we're at right now. Julia is absolutely right that the sector's really looked down their nose at government for many, many years. My genetics are government. And although I'm a well-established private equity manager, family office. My dad was in the state legislature in 1962. Probably, I think he was the first Latino elected to the legislature. I used to get babysat in Pat Brown's office when I was a kid, in the governor's office by their secretary when my dad would go and work. And that gave me a very unique perspective. A year to the day that my father passed away in 1997 and 1998, my mother at 72 was elected to the state legislature. And 6 months later, a good friend of ours, George Brown, died, who was a congressman in San Bernardino. And then Senator Joe Baca took his seat, and my mom, in a 60-day special, took his seat and spent the last 10 years of her life in the state Senate. But in that time, I had evolved from an environmental activist and to a consultant, and this emerging area of, it wasn't called clean tech, it was environmental services. And, I became known to being able to match technologies to meet these new rigorous standards with financing and then markets. And then I began to take little pieces of these companies as sweat equity. And I had enough of a track record to ultimately be asked by the pensions, CalPERS and CalSTRS one day, we're thinking about doing what this clean tech sector, what's coming up, we want to do a mandate here. And it was $2.7 billion. And it took 2 years to write the investment committee mandate. And Kathleen knows these exercises very well because through her leadership, independent of her father or her brother, she was state treasurer. And she had a couple of secret weapons within the treasurer's office that helped gain that private equity additional oomph. And that was the Pollution Control Finance Authority, our revenue bonds and so forth, which would come out of the treasurer's office. Fremont for Tesla was underwritten by the state of California with the Pollution Control Finance Authority, and then ultimately the last round came through
I'm
the
gonna
loan
recall
program
my bonds.
I know
They're 30-year bonds, right?
we created this Frankenstein.
We didn't know.
But so let me get to what we're talking about here in this cleanup, and to me, I'm not necessarily shaken by what's gone on within the sector. I don't think I had any doubt that if Trump were to get elected, we would be here. It was clear that he tried to do it before. It was clear with the insurrection that he would not go quietly into the night, and here we are. But it's also a time to begin to think about the sector through separate types of filters, and we know as longtime veterans who have invested in this space, and Kathleen has a legal practice that is involved in this area. Her son and Danny Weiss established Angeleno in her living room. That's around the same time that I was setting up my Fund 1. We were way early in this, and we all took it on the chin with the GFC too, but we stuck it out. And as a result, we have now experience in looking back on times like this. When Clinton Gore were in office, that was the beginning of this now 25, 30-year renaissance. And that is the point where you get your innovation from. And then when you get 2 terms of that, and then you go into a Bush era, that is where you get your market scale and your growth. And then when you get to Obama-Biden with the tragic global financial crisis that we had, but what did that do? It also created an opportunity to put huge amounts of capital into the space. And I happen to have been, when Barack was elected president, I was doing Get Out the Vote in New Mexico with Bill Richardson, who was a very, very dear friend and a mentor. And the president-elect and Federico Pena called and asked if I would be their executive office of the president's head for the White House transition team on energy and environment. So I spent the next 80 days in Washington, and every Thursday we would have a meeting at 6th and East Street on the 8th floor, and Gene Sperling, who became the National Economic Council, National Economic Advisor, would get up and say, okay, we've lost 600,000 jobs this week, what are we doing? And that gave us the first TARP 1, if you recall, the recovery plan. And unlike this era where we're at now, we had a Republican Congress and a Republican president who put his arm around our new president-elect and said, this is our guy, we got to get behind what he wants. And a Republican House and a Republican president voted and signed into law TARP 1, which reauthorized the PTC, the ITCs, the ethanol subsidies and so forth, but it put steroids on everything. This is the capital that made the loan program office modern to the point where we saw where it could put money into organizations like Tesla and so forth. It went from like 5 billion to like 30-40 billion dollars. And my buddy Mark Bernstein back there was all part of that, because he was working at Energy, and then he worked on the moonshot inside the White House. So there was a lot of momentum that we had in that era. Well, that's the point where you get greater innovation, right? That's, I mean, literally, that's the point where Antonio Villaraigosa and I were having tequila at 2 o'clock in the morning in Denver after the convention when Barack was nominated, and on the back of a napkin, he said, we have a clean tech corridor, we have a clean tech manufacturing facility, what else do we need? And I said, man, there's so much dough going into the sector, but we have to have people that look like our city involved. It can't be all Silicon Valley. And that was the birth of the LA Clean Tech Incubator, which is also being discussed with Mary Nichols and folks at UCLA at the Institute of Sustainable Cities to say, how can we accelerate the velocity of growth and scale? And so we use that era as our point, our launch point for the second generation of clean tech, what we call in the sector Clean Tech 2.0, to be the launch point for scale and growth. And Lacey, LA Clean Tech Incubator, has been an enormous, tremendous success over the years. And then of course Trump 2 comes, and our Trump 1, and it was during that period where we saw the doubling of investments and capital and technology in the climate tech space. It was a tremendous boon during the Trump years, and I suspect this will play out the same way, because we tend to overshoot the runway, overcompensate within the sector. And just this year we're going to double in solar, we're going to double in renewables. The amount of capital that is going into the space is in the trillions. We now see more charging stations in California than gas pumps. So we shouldn't be in despair, but we shouldn't be letting down our arms and thinking that this is a peaceful time. We're going to have to continue to fight. Clearly, IRA, the LPO, all the assets that we develop, legislative and regulatory wise, are under threat. Well, this is an administration that is really marching backwards into the future.
Tom has done a great job of picking us up and dusting us off and saying, look into the future and look to the past, and we will prevail. So thank you so much, Tom, for that kind of summing up of history. So with that, we have some time, a few minutes left for questions, and I have lots of questions, but I'd like to see if someone in the audience has a question to begin with. Yes, sir. Identify yourself, and then.
My name is Thomas Reeves. I am with Traction. We are an advisory firm, principally work with European companies with solutions in environmental sustainability. And I've spoken to Lauren earlier. I speak to Tom from time to time, but
the question is,
you actually kind of answered this, and we definitely need to talk about this afterwards, but what should we tell the Europeans who have all of these solutions, who've been doing all these things for 50 years, literally, like all of these hard solutions. Like, I remember when my mom got a front-loading washer in 1974, you can't buy those crappy top-loading ones because they use more energy, more water, and they damage clothes faster. What do we...
Well, listen, they can't rely on the U.S. In times like this, we see California stepping up and becoming the global leader like it had in the past, and it will again. And we're going to do it in this term. We all hope, I hope, it's a one-term, second presidency for Trump, and we could capture the White House in 28. Maybe we get the House in 26. But for right now, we have to rely on supporting this state government, our infrastructure, and making sure that we fend off as much of the federal threat that we could.
I'd like to hear from Danny to start with, because we've got some optimism going, but I'd like to get some concrete examples of how the tariffs, recently announced tariffs, how they're impacting you, if at all, your portfolio.
Sure. Well, I think the tariffs, along with interest rates, along with what's going to happen with the IRA, just generally has created uncertainty for the market, which is, one of the big negatives for everybody. So overall, there's just a long pause because everyone has to pick up their pencils and redo their estimates for projects and calculations. On that, a delay on the one hand. The good news is that because the costs have been driven down so much over the past 10, 15 years, these marginal changes will impact some projects, which may be kind of on the bubble, let's say, but a lot of these projects will still move forward. And so we'll continue to see that growth from some of our companies with global manufacturing footprints, in particular in Asia and in China. What we did in the first Trump administration is kind of realize what was happening and had started to change and diversify our supply chain to other countries in Asia, in Eastern Europe, and quite a bit into Mexico, frankly. And I think a lot of manufacturers now have shifted and are thinking about Mexico in particular as one possible solution. One of the issues is that there's not much of the supply chain there has been built up, but it can't absorb the shift of manufacturing from all these other global locations. And so quickly that capacity is going to be filled up. And as well, there's no supply chain for a lot of what is being manufactured. So think like iron castings. In the United States, that supply chain doesn't exist. So trying to rebuild it here is not going to happen in 1 to 5 years. Bless you. It's going to take decades if it's ever going to happen. So snapping our fingers and hoping it'll happen overnight is not realistic. And so there's going to be this kind of a rush to figure out, hey, where can we start manufacturing where it can still make economic sense to the extent it can happen in the U.S. People are going to do that. But realistically, it's not feasible with a lot of what is being produced. So that's kind of,
Lauren, how about from your fund's perspective? First, can you give an example or two? You alluded to it, but I'd love to hear sort of some concrete examples of what you're investing in and how they might be affected, if not by the tariffs, by other policies of this administration.
Sure. So a couple of thoughts. On the maybe sort of more positive side, an example. So if there's a portfolio in a company in our portfolio called Kula Bio, and they have developed an enzymatic pathway for natural organic nitrogen fertilizer that's certified organic in the U.S., certified organic in California, which is very, very hard to do. And what it allows us to do is take what otherwise today is a heavily carbon intensive industry that hundreds of millions of dollars to build a reactor. Often those reactors are not built in the United States, and you have to import them in and deal with all the other nitrogen runoff and all the other issues that you're facing from synthetic fertilizer. Versus Kula, extremely capital efficient, can build a bioreactor locally in the Central Valley, not for hundreds of millions of dollars, but for like single-digit millions of dollars, and then realize a 10 to 30%, or times, I should say, 10 to 30 times ROI in terms of the amount of volume that it can deploy out of a single bioreactor. So you've relieved a supply chain issue, you're offering incredible yield increases and benefits to farmers, and you have a much secure and more clean outcome.
Does that reactor have parts that are supplied globally that...
Here's the thing. They don't even need that many reactors to be able to replace the supply in the United States across farming communities. So it is much more resilient. Now, it is true. There are others, companies that are, building data centers, that are building heat pumps, that do rely on
The global supply
the
chain.
global supply chain. So absolutely, Julia, what you said about tightening belts and shoring up balance sheets, hugely important. Making sure that customers remain resilient in purchasing products, or what is the customer landscape going to look like? Those are open questions. I mean, I would say a month ago, we didn't see any signs, despite the signals of chaos. We didn't see any signs of slowing down. Now, this week is just a big open question, because this week has been a little bit more of a disruptive week, and I don't know what it's going to look like in a week from now. It could go back to what it was looking like a month ago, but that's not healthy either. So we're still trying to. Everyone's assessing what it's going to look like.
Julia, you come out of the news media, and you're a storyteller and that's how one of your great communication skills. One of the things that I've been struck by over the last, certainly the last week, if not several weeks, is we have witnessed one of the great brand destruction exercises in the history of time. From my perspective, I'm maybe giving something away, but there was trust in the United States as a trading partner, trust in our currency. We talked about uncertainty and how challenging that is to operate a business or in life with volatility and uncertainty. What is your sight line on the brand made in USA, not just products, but ideas, and everything that is USA? Is it damaged, and how do we manage that, or is it going to be?
We'll see what next week looks
okay?
like. Yeah, well, I appreciate that question. It's fun to step back, and not fun, but interesting. I also grew up in Canada, so I have a little bit of a perspective, and all my family's still there. And I would say the brand damage is very real, because they're not coming to spend their travel dollars here. They're not gonna. There's a huge "don't buy anything made in America" movement in Canada right now, which was wholly integrated with the United States. And when your number one unguarded border in the world and closest trading partners reacting that way in a visceral manner, it speaks to the fact that the brand is indeed damaged. And I think it creates bigger questions about US being the default currency of the world. If people can't trust you and you can, pull the rug out from under them, that creates some big open questions for far smarter people than me to start to grapple with. And I think we had a vision, certainly in the clean tech industry. I reported on it for years. I now get the chance to deploy these US-made products at GoodLeap because of the structure of the IRA, which was crafted precisely to incentivize building it here, deploying it here, and exporting it abroad. And we work with companies, I don't want to speak for them, but they were planning to do just that. They'd onshored not every single nut, bolt, and screw, but the vast majority of their supply chain and certainly the end product, and were planning to export. That all has now been thrown into disarray because of, again, as Lauren framed it, the most recent news, which, again, we're not alone in this in the clean energy or energy sector. I think everyone's sort of reeling right now. But I think there's real damage from that. I hope that, California, as a resident here now.
By California.
Yeah, exactly. By
to
California.
Have Tom pick up on Tom's thing.
Well, exactly. There's a lot of, I think, and hopefully bilateral relationships we're hearing the state may start to lead on with Canada, with others, to start to show how we can kind of punch, higher than, punch above our weight on that front. So I'm optimistic we can recuperate, but I think it is going to take a lot of engagement and bilateral relationships to make it happen.
That is great. I have even more questions, but I think we're out of time. Where's my timekeeper? Is my timekeeper?
Yeah, we saw 1 minute.
We have 1 minute? Oh, good. I get to ask one more question then. No, is there one more question from the audience?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You're at different stages of funding, but typically what are your check amounts?
Oh, that's a good concrete question. Lauren.
Sure. We are typically first check in. We're structured to be able to keep investing in later stages of companies that we invest in, but typically first checks in seed Series A, so anywhere from 1 to 5 million.
We're 10 to 30 million.
And Tom.
We're 200,000 to 1.5 million in the family office. I have a new fund I'm launching in May that will probably be in the area of 100 to 200 million per slug.
Well, let me just wrap up with one thought, and that is we can have all the policy changes and all the executive orders and all of the puffery and pontification, but at the end of the day, I think insurance companies aren't going to finance things unless they see there's resiliency and sustainability, not because it's a political issue, but because it's an economic survival issue. So I think somehow the markets may be our friend, and they may give us a rocky road for a while, but there's some truth tellers out there, and we'll see what happens. But thank you all for coming. This has been a great panel
Thank you.
from my perspective.